Hey everybody, welcome back to Summit for this fifth Sunday of Lent. My name is Mark. Let's jump into it. It's really easy to lose hope. It's really easy to look at your world, your situation, your life, your family, your job, school, whatever it is, and just to sometimes get kind of depressed or get kind of hopeless. Especially if there's a situation or a relationship that just isn't going well or hasn't changed, or you've tried to change it and it's not working. And you can kind of lose hope sometimes, is this ever going to change? God, why can't you change this? Why won't you do this? Sometimes we put God on our timetable, on our clock, right? And if something doesn't change, we start to lose hope that, is God paying attention? Does God care? Does God really love me? Does God even exist? It's a natural human thing, because when you're trapped in darkness, when you're trapped in a hard situation that isn't changing, no matter what you do, you can start to kind of ask those questions. It's a natural human thing, right? But God, He tries to remind us at every turn, through the Old Testament and New Testament, have hope. Put your hope in me. Put your trust in me. And when He gives us things like prophecies in the Old Testament, what He's trying to explain to us is, listen, even He's giving these prophecies to these prophets usually at dark times, when people are having a hard time and they're having a hard time hoping in God and trusting in God. And He'll send a prophet to remind them that, hey, it might not change today and it might not change tomorrow, but change is going to come. And just because you're going through a hard time doesn't mean I've abandoned you. In this first reading from the prophet Ezekiel, you're going to hear, he says, I'm going to open your graves. I'm going to raise the dead. Okay. Now, this is a hard thing, right? Because when Ezekiel is prophesying and preaching, it's a bad day in the kingdom of God, right? So they're thinking, what are you talking about? No, I'm going to open your graves. I'm going to raise the dead. Like, God's reminding them, like, death has no power, right? Sin has no power. The enemies have no power. I'm God. So this prophecy is given. But it's not till hundreds of years later that Jesus is going to come and actually fulfill these prophecies. But see, when God gives us a prophecy, He's giving us a promise. He's not giving us a timetable. He's giving us a promise. And that's really, really important to remember that. We can't put God on the clock. We have to just trust and have hope that God's going to act when God needs to act. And that's why St. Paul in the second reading is trying to say, listen, a lot of people are in the flesh. They see things just at face value. They see what's in front of them. But if you're living in the Spirit, not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, you're going to think bigger, you're going to think wider, you're going to think higher, and you're going to trust that God has a perfect plan that's playing out on His timetable, not on our own. That's why in this famous gospel reading from the Gospel of St. John, we hear Jesus, and he finds out his good friend Lazarus has died, and he's going to go to him. Now, it'd be easy for Mary and Martha, Lazarus' sisters, to think, hey, God, where you been? It's been 4 days. Like, come on, we sent word. What happened? And to want to put God on their timetable. They don't do that. They're weeping, they're sad, but they trust God. And what does Jesus do? Well, He fulfills His prophecy from Ezekiel. He raises Lazarus from the dead. But He also gives us an incredible example of why we never want to lose hope, because there's resurrection. Even in our times of death and in our darkest times, Jesus is coming to raise us. Jesus is coming to save us. And before He's going to resurrect from the dead, and we're going to hear about that next week, He raises Lazarus as this great example. Not only that God desires our life, but that God, He has a timetable. God always fulfills His promises. God always fulfills His prophecies. And God is always acting for what? For our salvation, because He wants to save us. If you haven't had a great Lent yet, that's okay. Some seasons are easier, better, worse than others. But it's not too late. You still have time before Holy Week. You still have time to enter in. Do whatever you can this week to look around in your life and say, where have I gotten frustrated because God hasn't acted, God hasn't changed? Where do I need more hope? And then go to the God of the universe, who is hope, and ask Him to refill you and reinstill that hope and that trust in His perfect plan.